"Sir, that boy in the portrait lived with me in the orphanage," said the maid in shock. The mansion's owner froze, as if a ghost from the past had been summoned without warning. The revelation reopened forgotten wounds, leading to a desperate search for a brother declared dead 30 years earlier. But no one imagined the truth hidden behind walls of luxury would involve missing children, false identities, and a reunion that would change everything. The mansion stood imposingly on Park Lane, hidden behind high walls and wrought-iron gates that seemed to guard more than just a property. It was one of those old constructions that had survived time and the greed of property developers, a silent witness to a London that no longer existed. On the outside, the facade still maintained the elegance of the 50s, with its ornate stonework and large windows framed in fine wood. Inside, however, the silence weighed like a physical presence, filling every room with the density of unresolved memories. Maria pushed open the door to the main living room for the third time that morning, carrying a bucket of water and cleaning cloths. It had only been 2 weeks since she had been hired as a housekeeper, and she was still surprised by the size of the place. There were so many rooms, so many corridors, so many staircases that led to places that seemed to have been abandoned for decades. The owner of the house, Mr. Leonard Ainsworth, was a discreet man, with a slow way of speaking and a distant gaze. He worked from home most of the time, locked in his office on the second floor, and rarely came down for meals. She had taken the job out of necessity. At 32, Maria still carried the marks of a difficult childhood, raised in an orphanage in the East End of London until she turned 18. After that, she had worked in private homes, cleaned offices, served in restaurants. She never had stability, never had roots. When she saw the ad in the newspaper asking for a live-in housekeeper with a fair salary and a proper contract, she didn't hesitate. She needed a roof over her head, a place where she could finally breathe without worrying about the next month's rent. But since she had arrived, something about the house bothered her. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a strange feeling, as if the walls were whispering stories she couldn't quite hear. Mr. Ainsworth was polite, but distant. He paid on time, made no absurd demands, but he also didn't converse. Sometimes Maria would hear him playing the piano in the drawing room, always the same melancholic melody that echoed through the corridors like an ancient lament. On that Tuesday morning, while cleaning the mahogany bookshelf that occupied an entire wall of the living room, Maria paused before a series of framed portraits. They were old photographs and paintings, most of them depicting people from another era, men in suits and ties, women in long dresses, serious children posing next to imposing furniture. She slowly wiped each frame, observing those faces that seemed frozen in time. It was then that her eyes landed on a different portrait. It was not a photograph, but an oil painting. The technique was refined, the delicate brushstrokes suggesting the hand of an experienced artist. The image showed a boy of about 7 or 8, sitting on a garden bench with a shy smile on his lips and his eyes turned towards something outside the frame. He wore a white shirt and dark trousers, and in the background one could see the silhouette of a piano and large windows letting in the sunlight. Maria felt her heart race. That face, those almond-shaped brown eyes, that restrained smile, that expression both serene and sad. She knew that face. She dropped the cloth on the bookshelf and held the frame with both hands, bringing it closer. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible, but the more she looked, the more certain she became. The memories came like a wave. Suddenly, she was no longer in the luxurious living room of the mansion. She was back at St. Vincent de Paul's Orphanage in Bethnal Green, an old and poorly maintained building where she had spent most of her childhood and adolescence. She remembered the narrow corridors, the bunk beds lined up in the collective dormitories, the smell of reheated food coming from the kitchen. She remembered the nuns' shouts, the fights between the children, the nights she cried softly so as not to wake the other girls. And she remembered him, the boy who arrived at the orphanage on a rainy August afternoon, brought by a woman in a grey suit who introduced herself as a social worker. He was 6, maybe 7. He didn't talk much, sat alone in the corner of the dining hall, and drew all the time on scraps of paper he found. The nun said he was traumatized, that he needed time to adjust. They called him Gabriel. Maria was 9 when he arrived. She was also quiet, also preferred to be alone. Perhaps that was why they had grown close. They began to sit together at mealtimes to play in the small courtyard at the back of the orphanage. Gabriel would draw and she would sit beside him watching. He drew large houses, gardens, pianos. He drew two boys holding hands. He drew huge windows with billowing curtains. One day, she asked him why he always drew the same things. He looked at her with those serious eyes and said he had a brother, an older brother who played the piano. He said he lived in a house with a huge garden, that he played hide and seek among the trees, that he listened to music every day. He said that one day in the park he got lost, and then he woke up somewhere else, and then the woman brought him here. Maria never knew if it was truth or fantasy. Many children in the orphanage invented stories about their families, about lives they might never have had. It was a way to survive, to create a past less painful than reality. But Gabriel spoke with such conviction, with so much detail, that she wanted to believe him. Sometimes when he drew, she saw tears silently streaming down his face. They grew up together in that place. Gabriel continued to draw, continued to talk about his brother, the piano, the big house. Gradually he opened up more, becoming less withdrawn. But at 14, everything changed. There was an incident with one of the orphanage staff, a violent man who worked in maintenance. Gabriel reacted, there was a commotion, and he ran away, simply disappeared. The nun said he wouldn't come back, that boys like him never came back. Maria cried for weeks. She had lost the only friend she had. And now, 20 years later, she was looking at that portrait. At that face she knew so well, but which had another name. Not Gabriel. The boy in the painting was from the Ainsworth family. He was Leonard Ainsworth's brother. Maria's hands were trembling. Was she going crazy? Was the exhaustion, the loneliness, the painful memories playing tricks on her mind? But no, she was sure. Those eyes, that restrained smile, that expression. It was him. Gabriel was Leonard's missing brother. She heard footsteps coming down the stairs. She quickly placed the portrait back on the shelf, picked up the cloth and pretended to be cleaning. Leonard entered the room wearing beige linen trousers and a white shirt. At 43, he was a handsome man with dark hair beginning to grey at the temples, broad shoulders, and an erect posture. But there was something in his eyes that always seemed extinguished, an old sadness he carried as if it were part of his very frame. "Good morning, Maria," he said in the low, polite voice he always used. "Is everything all right?" She swallowed hard. "Good morning, Mr. Ainsworth. Yes, everything's fine. Just cleaning." He nodded and walked to the window, looking out at the street through the lace curtains. He stood there for a few moments, hands in his pockets, his expression distant. Maria knew she shouldn't ask, that it wasn't her place, that it could cost her job, but she couldn't stop herself. "Mr. Ainsworth, may I ask a question?" He turned, surprised. "Of course." "That portrait there, of the boy. Who is he?" Leonard followed her gaze to the painting on the shelf. His expression changed immediately. Something passed through his eyes, something akin to pain. He was silent for so long that Maria thought he wouldn't answer. "He's my brother," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "My younger brother." Maria felt her heart pound. "And where is he now?" Leonard looked away. "I don't know. He disappeared when he was 7. I was 10. We were in Hyde Park. My mother was with us, but there was a moment of distraction. When we realized, he was gone. We searched everywhere. The police were called. Posters were put up all over the city. Investigations were opened. But we never found him." His voice was choked with emotion. Maria realized it still hurt, even after all these years. Leonard looked back at the portrait, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw tears in his eyes. "My mother never recovered," he continued with difficulty. "She spent years searching, visiting hospitals, shelters, orphanages. My father buried himself in work, couldn't cope with the loss. And I made a promise. I promised I would find my brother, that I would never give up. But over time the leads ran out. People said it was better to accept it, to move on. My mother passed away 10 years ago. My father, 5 years later. and I was left alone in this house with this unfulfilled promise. Maria felt tears in her own eyes. She knew what she needed to say, but she was afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of creating false hope. Afraid of reopening wounds that were perhaps better left closed. But she looked at the portrait again, and the certainty returned. She couldn't stay silent. "Mr. Ainsworth," she said, her voice trembling, "I think I know your brother." He turned so quickly he almost stumbled. "What?" "I grew up in an orphanage," Maria continued, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "St. Vincent de Paul's in Bethnal Green. When I was 9, a boy arrived there. He was 6 or 7. They said a social worker brought him, but he always said he had an older brother, that he lived in a big house with a piano, that he got lost in the park one day. He drew all the time. He drew 2 boys holding hands. He drew large windows. He drew a garden. They called him Gabriel, but I'm sure it's him. The face is the same." Leonard stood motionless, as if struck by lightning. His breathing became ragged, his eyes fixed on Maria with an intensity that almost frightened her. "Are you certain?" he asked. His voice hoarse. "I am. I was with him every day. We grew up together. I recognize that face, Mr. Ainsworth. It's him." He took 2 steps forward, then stopped, as if he didn't know what to do with his body. He ran a hand through his hair, took several deep breaths. "Where is he now? Do you know?" Maria's heart ached. "He ran away from the orphanage when he was 14. There was a problem there, a difficult situation, and he disappeared. I never heard from him again. But I remember everything he used to say, the details, the things he drew." Leonard walked to the sofa and sat down, as if his legs could no longer support him. He put his face in his hands and stayed that way for long minutes. Maria didn't know if she should approach, if she should say something. Then he lifted his face and she saw that he was crying. "All these years," he said, his voice broken, "my mother visited dozens of orphanages. How did she not find this one? How did he just disappear into the system?" Maria sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't know, Mr. Ainsworth, but I remember that the woman who brought him presented documents, a different name. Maybe that's why your mother never got there. The records were wrong." Leonard took a deep breath, wiped his face with his hands, and looked at her with a determination that wasn't there before. "Can you take me to this orphanage?" "I can, but I don't know if it's still open. It's been many years since I left." "It doesn't matter. We have to go. We need to find out what happened." "You said he drew?" "Yes. All the time he had a notebook full of drawings." Leonard stood up quickly and left the room. Maria heard his footsteps going up the stairs, then coming down again. He returned holding an old leather folder. He opened it and took out several children's drawings, spreading them on the coffee table. They were pencil and crayon drawings, 2 boys holding hands. A piano, large windows, a garden with trees, the same images that Gabriel used to draw at the orphanage. "He made these drawings before he disappeared," Leonard explained, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother kept everything. She said they were his memories, that one day he would come back and need them." Maria carefully picked up one of the drawings. She felt a shiver run down her spine. They were the same strokes, the same style, the same obsession with those images. Gabriel had continued to draw the same things at the orphanage. He had continued to hold on to those memories, even when everything around him tried to erase them. "He never forgot," she whispered. "Even after everything, he never forgot." Leonard looked at her, and for the first time, Maria saw something beyond sadness in his eyes. She saw hope. A fragile, frightened, but living hope. "Then we have to find him," he said. "We have to bring my brother back." Maria nodded. But even as she agreed, a doubt began to form in her mind. Gabriel had run away so long ago. He had disappeared without a trace. Where would he be now? What had happened to him all these years? Was it possible to find someone who didn't want to be found? And there was something else. Something that was beginning to bother Maria in a way she couldn't yet fully name. If Gabriel had been taken to the orphanage with false documents, with an invented name, then it hadn't been an ordinary disappearance. It had been planned. Someone had taken him on purpose. Someone had wanted him to disappear. And what if that someone was still out there? What if finding Gabriel meant opening doors that should perhaps remain closed? But when she looked at Leonard, at the expression of hope mixed with pain on his face, she knew there was no turning back. They had to find out the truth, whatever the cost. "Tomorrow we'll go to the orphanage," Leonard said. "We need to start there." Maria agreed. She went back to her chores, but she couldn't concentrate anymore. She spent the rest of the day thinking about Gabriel, about the afternoons they sat together in the orphanage courtyard, about the drawings he made with such care. She thought about how he spoke of his brother, with that absolute certainty that one day he would be found. And she thought about how he had run away, disappearing into the night without saying goodbye to her. That night, lying in her room at the back of the mansion, Maria couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. And suddenly she heard it. The piano. Leonard was playing that melancholic melody again, the one that echoed through the corridors. But this time, Maria paid real attention, and she recognized it. It was the same tune that Gabriel used to hum quietly when he was drawing, the same melody he said his brother played. She got up and walked to her bedroom door. The corridor was dark, lit only by the moonlight coming through the windows. She followed the sound of the piano until she reached the drawing room. The door was ajar. She peeked inside and saw Leonard sitting at the piano, his eyes closed, his fingers gliding over the keys with a familiarity that came from years of practice. But it wasn't just technique. It was pure emotion. Each note carried weight, pain, longing. It was a song that spoke of loss, of searching, of unfulfilled promises. It was a song that traversed time, connecting two brothers separated by circumstances neither of them could control. Maria felt tears stream down her face. Suddenly, she understood something profound. It wasn't just Leonard who was looking for Gabriel. It was Gabriel who, in some way, was also looking for Leonard. Through the drawings, through the memories he insisted on keeping alive, through that melody he could never forget. And now, after so many years, their paths were finally crossing again. Through her, through a dusty portrait on a mahogany bookshelf, through memories that refused to die. Leonard finished playing and rested his hands on the keys, his head bowed. Maria silently moved away, returning to her room. But she knew that something had changed in that house. The silence that weighed like a physical presence was beginning to dissipate. The memories that were only pain were starting to transform into something different, into possibility, into hope. Tomorrow they would go to the orphanage, and who knows, they might find the first clues to bring Gabriel back. To finally fulfill that promise, made so many years ago by a 10-year-old boy who could never forgive himself for losing his brother. Maria closed her eyes, but sleep remained distant, because along with hope came fear. Fear of what they might discover. Fear that the truth would be more painful than the doubt. Fear that in trying to recover the past they would end up destroying what little of the present remained. But there was no choice. The journey had begun, and now they had to see it through to the end. The day dawned overcast over London, with that heavy grey that seemed to trap the entire city under a damp blanket. Maria woke up early, despite having slept little. She dressed carefully, choosing dark jeans and a simple, long-sleeved blouse. She looked at herself in the mirror of the small bathroom attached to her room and saw the signs of fatigue under her eyes. But there was something else, a determination that wasn't there before. Leonard was already waiting for her in the kitchen when she came down. He was dressed more casually than usual, in jeans and a navy blue cotton shirt. He had made coffee, and the strong aroma filled the room as Maria entered. "Good morning," he said, pouring 2 cups. "Did you sleep well?" She accepted the coffee and smiled faintly. "Not really. And you?" He shook his head. "Me neither. I was up all night thinking about everything you told me yesterday, trying to understand how this was possible, how my mother visited so many places and never found this orphanage." Maria, took a sip of the hot coffee. Maybe she went there, but with the wrong name. If Gabriel was registered under another name, there was no way for her to know. The system was chaotic back then. Many children arrived without proper documentation. Some just showed up. Leonard leaned his elbows on the kitchen counter, his eyes fixed on the cup between his hands. I want you to know that I'm grateful for what you're doing. I know it's not your obligation, that this might bring back difficult memories for you too. Maria felt a tightness in her chest. Gabriel was my friend, the only friend I had for years. I also need to know what happened to him. And besides, there's a possibility I'm not the only one. If there was a network of disappearances, if children were taken and placed in orphanages with false documents, then it needs to be investigated. He looked at her with respect. You're brave, Maria, more than you know. They finished their coffee in silence and left. Leonard drove a discreet black sedan, and Maria gave him directions. They left Park Lane behind, heading towards the east end of the city. The traffic was as heavy as ever, crowded double-decker buses vying for space with cars and motorcycles. They passed through residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, industrial areas. The landscape changed with every mile, gradually becoming simpler, more working class. When they reached Bethnal Green, Maria felt her stomach churn. It had been years since she'd been back. She recognized the corner bakery where the nuns sometimes took them to buy bread on Sundays. She recognized the small market where she had once tried to steal a chocolate bar and was caught by the owner, who took her back to the orphanage with a stern lecture. It's there, she said, pointing to a building in the middle of the block. St. Vincent de Paul's orphanage was still standing, but it looked as if it had aged decades since Maria had last seen it. The paint was peeling. Some windows had broken panes patched with cardboard and tape. The iron gate was ajar, creaking in the wind. There was a faded sign out front, in the process of being decommissioned. Leonard parked on the street and they got out. Maria felt her legs tremble as she walked through the gate. The courtyard where she used to play with Gabriel was overgrown with weeds, the rusty swing hanging crookedly from chains that looked ready to break. The memories came in a flood. Her and Gabriel sitting on the front steps, sharing a piece of bread. Gabriel drawing on the concrete with a piece of chalk. The other children running, shouting, fighting. The main door was open. They entered cautiously. The corridor was dark, lit only by the faint light coming through the dirty windows. It smelled of mildew and neglect. The walls had damp stains and a few religious pictures still hung crookedly on the walls. "Hello?" Leonard called out. "Is anyone here?" They heard a noise from the end of the corridor, shuffling footsteps approaching. An elderly woman appeared, bent with age, wearing a faded grey habit. Her face was wrinkled and her eyes were tired, but there was still a firmness in her posture. "Who are you?" she asked in a hoarse voice. "This place is closed." Maria stepped forward. "Sister Benedicta, it's me, Maria. I lived here as a child." The nun narrowed her eyes, coming closer to see better. Maria Smith?" "Yes, sister." The old woman's face softened slightly. "You've grown. How long has it been?" 14 years since I left." Sister Benedicta nodded slowly. "Why have you come back?" Maria looked at Leonard, who stepped forward. "My name is Leonard Ainsworth. I'm looking for my brother. He disappeared 30 years ago when he was 7. Maria told me there was a boy here named Gabriel who might be him." Sister Benedicta's expression changed. It became more closed, more cautious. "Gabriel? Yes, I remember him. A quiet boy. Drew a lot." Leonard took a photo from his pocket. It was a printed version of the oil portrait Maria had seen in the mansion. The sister took the photo with trembling hands and held it close to her eyes. She stared at it for long seconds. Then she nodded slowly. "It's him, no doubt. The face is younger in this photo, but it's the same boy. He came here in 1995, brought by a woman who claimed to be a social worker. She presented documents, said the boy had been found abandoned. The name on the papers was Gabriel Santos. There was no mention of family, of his previous whereabouts, nothing. Just the basics." Leonard took a deep, shaky breath, clearly emotional. "And the woman? Who was she?" "I don't know. We never saw her again. At the time these things happened, the system was flawed. Children would arrive without a complete history, sometimes without proper documentation. We did what we could with what we had. Maria felt anger rising. But didn't you suspect anything? A 6-year-old boy who talked about having a family, who drew the same house, the same brother, all the time. Sister Benedicta sighed, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely sad. We did suspect, yes, but what could we do? We didn't have the resources to investigate. We reported it to the authorities, but we never heard back, and the boy couldn't give any concrete information. He didn't remember his family's surname, didn't know the address. He was too young. We thought it might be fantasy, a way of coping with the trauma of abandonment. Leonard clenched his fists. My family searched for him everywhere. My mother visited dozens of institutions. How did you not cross-reference the information? Because the name was wrong, Maria intervened. She was looking for Michael Ainsworth, not Gabriel Santos, and if the registration was deliberately made with false data, there was no way to connect the information. Sister Benedicta nodded. That's likely, and there was another problem. At the time, this orphanage wasn't integrated into the official search system. We were a private institution, run by the church. It was only years later that we became part of the municipal network. By the time that happened, many old records were already lost or incomplete. Leonard ran a hand over his face, clearly frustrated. So, he was here the whole time. While my mother was desperately searching, he was just a few miles away. It was no one's fault, Sister Benedicta said, gently. It was a failure of the system. A terrible failure, but one that happened more often than we'd like to admit. And Gabriel? Maria asked. You said he ran away. What exactly happened? The nun's expression grew even darker. There was an incident. One of the maintenance staff, a Mr. Oswald, was a difficult man. He had a drinking problem, was aggressive with the children. We tried to get rid of him several times, but it was hard to find replacements. One night, he assaulted one of the younger girls. Gabriel saw it and reacted. There was a fight. Gabriel ran away after that and never came back. Leonard's blood ran cold. He was 14. Yes, it was 2002, winter. He ran away on a cold July night and simply vanished. We searched, called the police, but with no success. Many boys ran away from here back then. Most ended up on the streets. Some were found, others weren't. Maria felt tears burn her eyes. She remembered that night. She remembered the commotion, the shouts, Gabriel running out through the gate. She remembered calling his name, but he didn't look back, and then the silence. His absence in the dining hall, in the dormitory, in the courtyard, the feeling of having lost the only person in the world who truly understood her. Did you keep anything of his? Leonard asked. Any belongings, any documents? Sister Benedicta thought for a moment. Perhaps. Come with me. She led them through narrow corridors to a small room at the back of the building. It was a dimly lit storage room, filled with haphazardly stacked cardboard boxes. It smelled of old paper and mildew. The nun began to search among the boxes, reading faded labels. Here, she said finally, pulling a box from a pile. These are the things from the children who left the orphanage without collecting their belongings. Gabriel is in here. Leonard carefully took the box and placed it on a dusty table. He opened it slowly. Inside were old clothes, some folded, others crumpled, a pair of worn-out trainers, and at the bottom, a spiral notebook with a worn cover. Maria recognized it immediately. It was Gabriel's sketchbook. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened it. The pages were yellowed, some torn at the edges, but the drawings remained clear. Page after page of the same theme. 2 boys holding hands, a piano, large windows, a garden, and on one of the last pages, a sentence written in an unsure, childish script. My brother will find me one day. Leonard read over her shoulder and felt the tears flow freely. My God, he never gave up. Even after all those years, he believed. There's one more thing, said Sister Benedicta, taking a yellowed envelope from the box. We found this in the pocket of one of his trousers after he ran away. I think he meant to take it, but forgot. Leonard opened the envelope. Inside was a piece of paper torn from an old newspaper. It was a missing persons ad published in 1995. It had a photo of a child, information about the disappearance, and a phone number to contact. The child in the photo was clearly the boy from the portrait. It was Michael Ainsworth. He had this, Leonard whispered. He knew who he was. He knew someone was looking for him. Perhaps one of the nuns showed it to him, Sister Benedicta suggested. Or maybe he found it by chance, but yes, he knew, and he kept it for years. Maria closed her eyes, trying to control her emotions. Gabriel had carried that hope throughout his childhood. He had believed he would be found, that his brother would keep his promise. And when he ran away, he took with him not only the pain of never having been rescued, but also the confirmation that he really did have a family looking for him. "We have to find him," Leonard said with renewed determination. "Sister Benedicta, do you have any idea where he might have gone?" The nun shook her head. "No. Back then, boys who ran away usually went to the Trafalgar Square area, to the city center. There were more people there, more places to hide, but that was so long ago. He could be anywhere now." Maria thought quickly. "And the other records? About the woman who brought him? About how he got here? Do they still exist?" Sister Benedicta made a vague gesture. "Some records were preserved when the orphanage was transferred to the municipal system. Others were lost. I can check the files we still have." She took them to another, even smaller room where there were old metal cabinets. She opened one and began to search through worn folders. Finally, she pulled out a thin folder with the name Gabriel Santos handwritten on the spine. "Here it is. But there's not much. An admission form, basic behavioral reports, simple medical records." Leonard took the folder and began to read. Maria moved closer to see. The admission form had minimal information: a false full name, an approximate date of birth, circumstances of arrival. The Guardian field had the name Monica Fisher Smith, with an ID number that was probably also fake. "Does it have her address?" Leonard asked. "No, just the ID number and a signature." Maria analyzed the signature. It was fluid, educated, a person with some level of schooling. "Monica Fisher Smith might be a fictitious name," she said, "but the signature could give us clues. If we can trace other documents signed by the same person, we might discover her true identity." Leonard agreed. "And this woman, when she brought Gabriel, did she say anything? Did she give any explanation as to how she found him?" Sister Benedicta frowned, straining to remember. "She said the boy was found wandering alone in a distant neighborhood. She said she had tried to locate him at police stations but had no success. That it was best to bring him here where he would receive proper care. She was convincing. She seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being." "But it was all a lie," Maria murmured. "She knew exactly who he was. She knew he had a family looking for him. And yet she brought him here with false documents." Leonard clenched his fists again. "Why? What was the motive? If it wasn't for money, if there was no ransom demand, what was the point?" "We might not know until we find this woman," Maria said. "Or Gabriel. He might have heard something, seen something. Even as a child, he might have information that could help us." Sister Benedicta led them back to the main corridor. "I'm sorry I can't be of more help. This place is being permanently decommissioned next month. The few remaining records will be transferred to the municipal archives. If you need more information, you'll have to look there." Leonard thanked her, and they left the orphanage. The day had become even grayer, and a light drizzle began to fall. Maria looked back one last time before getting into the car. That building had been her home for years. It had been the place where she grew up, where she learned to survive, where she met Gabriel. And now it was being closed, turning into another one of the city's ghosts. On the way back, Leonard drove in silence, lost in thought. Maria held Gabriel's sketchbook in her lap, carefully running her fingers over the pages. Suddenly something caught her eye. At the back of the notebook, between the last few pages, was a folded piece of paper that had gone unnoticed before. She unfolded it carefully. It was another drawing, but different from the others. It didn't show two boys or a piano, it showed a woman's face. It was unfinished, just the basic outlines, but there was something disturbing about it. The expression was captured even in the simple strokes. It was a severe face, with cold eyes, and underneath, written in shaky letters, a single word: fear. Leonard glanced at the drawing when Maria showed it to him. "Who is that?" "I don't know. But Gabriel drew this woman and wrote that he was afraid of her. Could it be this Monica, the one who took him to the orphanage? It's possible. Or someone connected to her, someone he met before he got there. They continued in silence to the mansion. When they arrived, Leonard parked, but didn't get out of the car immediately. He stared at the rain that was beginning to fall more heavily on the windscreen. "Maria," he said finally, "there's something I didn't tell you. When my brother disappeared, there were rumors. People said they saw a couple taking a child from the park that day, but the descriptions were vague, contradictory. The police couldn't confirm it. My mother always believed he was taken by someone, that it wasn't an accidental disappearance. And now with everything we've discovered, I think she was right." Maria felt a chill. If someone planned this, if there was a network organizing these disappearances, then we're meddling in something dangerous. "I know. But I can't stop now, not after getting this close." She looked at him and saw the determination mixed with pain. "I can't stop either. Gabriel was my friend. And if there are other children, other families destroyed by this, we need to expose the truth." Leonard finally got out of the car. "We'll do it together then, to the end." They entered the mansion, soaked from the rain. Maria went straight to her room, changed her clothes, and lay down on the bed. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about Gabriel, about where he might be at that very moment. Was he alive? Was he okay? Had he managed to build a life, or had the wounds of his childhood destroyed him? And she thought about herself. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to question her own story. She had always accepted as truth that she had been left on the orphanage doorstep as a baby, that her mother hadn't wanted her. But what if she had been taken too? What if there was also a family somewhere that had never stopped looking for her? The possibility was both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because it meant years of pain could have been avoided. Comforting because it meant that maybe somewhere someone cared. But it wasn't the time to think about that. First, they had to find Gabriel. Then, perhaps, she could search for her own answers. Downstairs she heard the piano again, Leonard playing that melancholic melody. But this time there was something different. It wasn't just sadness, it was hope too. A fragile but real hope. And for the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some stories had happy endings, that some promises could be kept, even decades later, that some lost people could be found. She closed her eyes and finally fell asleep, lulled by the sound of the piano and the rain falling outside, washing over the city and all its painful memories. The following days were a succession of research, phone calls, and visits to forgotten places in the city. Leonard hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Robert, who had experience in missing persons cases. Together, they began to assemble a complex puzzle of clues and possibilities. The municipal archives had fragmented records. The transfer of documents from St. Vincent de Paul's orphanage to the official system had been disorganized, and much information had been lost in the process. But Robert managed to locate other similar cases. Children who arrived at different institutions around the same time, all with incomplete or suspicious documentation, all brought by people who presented themselves as social workers. On a rainy Tuesday, Robert showed up at the mansion with a folder full of photocopies. Leonard and Maria sat with him in the dining room, spreading the documents over the dark wood table. "Look at this," Robert said, pointing to a series of records. Between 1993 and 1997, at least 15 children were registered in different London orphanages under similar circumstances, all between 4 and 8 years old, all without a complete family history, all brought by women who claimed to be social workers, but whose names were not in any official records. 15, Leonard repeated, his voice low. 15 destroyed families. Robert nodded. "And these are just the cases I was able to trace. There could have been more. The system was chaotic back then. Many records were lost or never properly existed." Maria studied the documents, her stomach churning. There were photos of some of the children, small, scared, lost faces, and there were also some behavioral reports. Several children spoke of large houses, of families that didn't exist in the records, of memories that were dismissed as fantasies. "This is horrible," she whispered. "How did no one notice? How was this allowed to happen?" Robert sighed. It was a different time. Less technology, less control. And unfortunately, some people took advantage of those loopholes. There are indications that a network was operating. People who abducted children from wealthy families and placed them in the system as abandoned. It wasn't for ransom. It was so they would disappear permanently. But why? Leonard asked. What was the motive? Robert hesitated before answering. There are a few theories. Revenge, envy, illegal adoption attempts that went wrong. In some cases, there were family disputes, inheritances at stake. In others, it seems to have been pure malice. People who wanted to cause pain. Leonard ran, a hand over his face, exhausted. My family didn't have enemies. My father was a businessman, yes, but he wasn't the type to make mortal enemies. He was a fair man. Sometimes it doesn't have to be personal, Robert said. Sometimes it's just opportunity. A child unattended for a few minutes in a busy park. Someone who sees it and acts quickly. Maria looked at the drawing Gabriel had made of the woman with cold eyes. We need to find this Monica Fisher-Smith, or whoever she is. Robert agreed. I'm already working on that. The ID she used is fake, but I'm trying to trace the signature. If she used the same name in other places, I might find a pattern. And what about Gabriel? Leonard asked. Do we have any leads on where he went after he ran away? Robert opened another folder. Yes, and this is where the story gets interesting. There's a record at a hospital in South London, St. Luke's Municipal Hospital in Brixton. In 2003, a young man of about 16 was admitted with minor injuries and signs of malnutrition. He had no documents, couldn't clearly remember his identity. The doctors suspected partial amnesia, possibly caused by trauma. Leonard leaned over the table. And the name? The young man identified himself as Gabriel Michael, a combination of the two names. And look at this. Robert placed copies of drawings on the table. They were scribbles on hospital paper, but unmistakable. Two boys holding hands, a piano, large windows. It's him, Maria said immediately, her heart racing. It's Gabriel. He kept drawing the same things. Exactly, Robert confirmed. He stayed at the hospital for about 3 months, underwent therapy, psychological evaluations. The records indicate he was withdrawn, spoke little, but was polite. He drew obsessively. One of the psychologists noted that he seemed to be trying to remember something important through the drawings. And then? Leonard asked, anxious. What happened next? Robert paused. He disappeared. One morning he was just gone. He left a note saying he needed to go back to where he started, and he left an address, the address of St. Vincent de Paul's Orphanage. So he went back, Maria whispered. After everything, he went back to the orphanage. Robert nodded. But when he got there, the orphanage was already in the process of being decommissioned. There are reports from neighbors who said they saw a young man loitering around the building for a few days. Then he disappeared again. Leonard stood up and began pacing the room. So, he's been going in circles for years. From the orphanage to the streets, from the streets to the hospital, from the hospital back to the orphanage, looking for something he couldn't name. Or looking for you, Maria said gently. Even without fully remembering, some part of him knew he had a brother, knew he had a place to return to. They spent the rest of the day analyzing the documents. Robert promised to continue investigating, looking for more recent records of Gabriel Michael. He said it would be difficult, as without official documentation, people tended to disappear into the cracks of the system. But there was hope. There was always hope. That night, Maria couldn't sleep again. She lay thinking about Gabriel, imagining the years he had spent alone, trying to piece together the fragments of a shattered identity. She thought about how frightening it must have been to not fully remember who he was, carrying only vague sensations of a past that seemed to belong to someone else. And she thought of Leonard, of how he had carried the guilt for so many years, of how that childhood promise had become the central axis of his adult life. She saw it in the way he moved through the house, how he looked at the portraits, how he played that melody on the piano every night. The next morning Robert called. He had a lead. A friend who worked in the city centre had mentioned a street artist who drew portraits in Covent Garden. Young, introspective, didn't talk much. And when he drew, he always included the same elements in the background. 2 boys. A piano. Leonard and Maria left immediately. The traffic was chaotic as always, but Leonard drove with renewed determination. When they arrived at Covent Garden, the sun was already high. The square was bustling, full of street vendors, street performers, people coming and going. They searched among the artists scattered along the paths and benches. There were painters, musicians, jugglers, living statues. And then Maria saw him, sitting on a bench under a tree with a small cardboard sign beside him that read, "Portraits 10. It was him. Older, of course, thinner. He had a stubble and long hair tied back in a ponytail. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans and a grey t-shirt, but the face was unmistakable. It was Gabriel. It was Michael. Maria felt her legs go weak. Leonard stopped beside her, following her gaze. When he saw the man on the bench, his breath caught. He stood completely still, as if afraid any movement would make the image disappear. "Is it him?" he whispered, though he already knew the answer. Maria nodded, unable to speak. Tears were streaming freely down her face. Leonard took a step forward, then stopped. He seemed paralyzed between the desire to run to his brother and the fear of scaring him away. Maria touched his arm gently. "Go slowly," she said. "He might not recognize us. He might get scared." Leonard took several deep breaths, trying to calm himself. Then he walked slowly towards the bench. Maria followed a few steps behind, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. The man was drawing a portrait of a small child who was posing patiently next to her mother. His fingers moved skillfully over the paper, creating delicate and precise lines. He didn't look up as Leonard approached. "Excuse me," Leonard said, his voice trembling. "Do you draw portraits?" The man nodded without looking up from the paper. £10, 20 minutes. Leonard sat on the bench beside him, keeping a respectful distance. Maria stood behind him, watching. The artist finished the child's portrait, handed it to the mother who paid and left smiling. Then he finally looked at Leonard, and it was those eyes. The same almond-shaped brown eyes Maria remembered from childhood. The same eyes that were in the portrait in the mansion. But now they carried weight, untold stories, accumulated pain. "Want a portrait?" the man asked in a low voice. Leonard hesitated. "Actually, I'd like to talk to you, if you have a moment." The man frowned slightly, suspicious. "About what?" "About your past. About who you are." The artist's expression immediately closed off. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maria stepped forward. "Gabriel, or do you prefer Michael?" The man froze. He turned slowly to look at Maria. He studied her face for long seconds. Then something in his expression changed, a flicker of recognition, uncertain and distant. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice even, quieter. Maria sat on the other side of him. "You do. We grew up together in St. Vincent de Paul's orphanage. I'm Maria. You were my friend." The man blinked several times, as if trying to focus on a blurred image. "Maria. Yes, I remember. Not everything, but I remember you. You used to sit with me in the courtyard when I drew." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes again. "Yes, you always drew 2 boys and a piano. You always told me about your brother, the brother who was going to find you one day." The man looked at Leonard then, really seeing him for the first time. His face turned pale. He raised a trembling hand and slowly extended it, as if he wanted to touch Leonard's face, but wasn't sure if he was real. "You," he whispered. "I know you. I dream about you. Every night. You play the piano." Leonard couldn't hold back any longer. He took his brother's hand in both of his, squeezing it as if he feared he would disappear. "I'm your brother. I'm Leonard. You're Michael. Michael Ainsworth. You disappeared when you were 7, I was 10, and I never stopped looking for you. Never." The man began to tremble. He squeezed his eyes shut, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "I don't remember everything. There are gaps. Big gaps in my memory. But I remember you. I remember the piano. I remember the song you played, and I remember getting lost, being scared, waking up in strange places and not knowing how I got there. Leonard pulled his brother into a hug. Michael resisted for a moment, stiff and confused, but then he yielded. His shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. Maria was crying too, watching the two brothers finally reunited after 30 years of separation. People passed by in the square, some stopping to look, others going on their way without noticing the intense moment happening on that bench under the tree. But for Leonard, Maria, and Michael, the entire world had shrunk to that instant. 30 years of pain, of searching, of unfulfilled promises, finally converging in a single embrace. When they finally separated, Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Sorry, I don't usually cry in front of strangers." "We're not strangers," Leonard said, his voice still thick with emotion. "We're family." Michael shook his head, still confused. "But how? How did you find me?" "It was Maria. She recognized your portrait in my house, the portrait our mother had painted shortly before you disappeared." "Our mother," Michael repeated, as if testing the words in his mouth. "Do I remember her?" "I think so. I remember a smell, of perfume, and a soft voice singing, but it's all very hazy." "She looked for you for years," Leonard said. "She visited dozens of places, never gave up. But when you were taken to the orphanage, they used a fake name, Gabriel Santos. That's why she could never find you." "Gabriel Santos," Michael murmured. "That's the name they used. I always knew it wasn't my real name. I always felt I was someone else, but I couldn't remember who." Maria gently touched his arm. "And do you remember anything about who took you, about how you got to the orphanage?" Michael closed his eyes, concentrating. "There was a woman. I remember her vaguely. She had cold eyes. She scared me. She told me my family didn't want me anymore, that I had been abandoned. And then she took me to that place, but I knew it was a lie. I remembered you. I remembered our house, the garden, the piano." Leonard clenched his fists. "That woman will pay for what she did. We'll find her. We'll get justice." Michael opened his eyes and looked at his brother. "I don't know if I want revenge. I just want to understand. I want to fill the gaps in my memory. I want to know who I really am." "And you will," Leonard promised. "We'll help you. There's an investigator working on the case, and Maria is with us. Together we'll find out the whole truth." Michael looked at Maria then, really focusing on her for the first time. "You stayed with me at the orphanage. When I had nightmares, you sat by my bed. When the other kids were cruel, you defended me. I remembered that, but I thought it was a dream." Maria smiled through her tears. "It wasn't a dream. It was real. You were my best friend, Gabriel. Or Michael. The name doesn't matter. You were always my friend." They talked for hours there in the square. Michael recounted fragments of what he remembered. The years on the streets after. He ran away from the orphanage. The time in the hospital where they tried to help him recover his memory. The decision to become a street artist, drawing portraits to survive while continuing to search for something he couldn't name. Leonard told him about their mother, about how she never gave up, about their father who buried himself in work to escape the pain, about the promise he made that shaped his entire life, about the empty mansion where he lived alone, guarding memories and hopes. As the sun began to set, Leonard suggested they go to the mansion. Michael hesitated, clearly frightened by the idea. But Maria touched his hand and said she would be there too, that he wasn't alone, and that seemed to help. In the car on the way, Michael was quiet, looking out the window as if seeing the city for the first time. Leonard drove slowly, casting frequent glances at his brother in the back seat, as if needing to constantly confirm that he was real. When they arrived at the mansion, Michael stopped in front of the gate, looking at the facade with a confused expression. "I know this place. I've been here before." "This was our home," Leonard said. "It's where you grew up until you were 7. They went inside together. Michael walked through the corridors as if in a trance. He stopped before each painting, each piece of furniture, touching the surfaces with trembling fingers. When they reached the drawing room where the piano was, he froze. "This piano," he whispered. "I remember this piano." He approached it slowly and carefully touched the keys. The sound echoed through the room. Then, without anyone expecting it, he began to play. It was the melody Leonard played every night. The melody Maria remembered Gabriel humming at the orphanage. When he finished, there were tears in his eyes again. "I remember this song. You taught me. We used to sit here together, and you would show me the notes." Leonard sat beside him on the piano bench. "Yes, you loved music. You always wanted to learn to play." They stayed there for long minutes, sitting side by side as they had done so many years ago. And for the first time in 3 decades, the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. The first few days of Michael's life in the mansion were as delicate as glass. He moved through the rooms with caution, like a visitor in a museum, touching objects with reverence, but always keeping a safe distance. Leonard respected this, not forcing proximity, not demanding memories. He was just present, available, waiting. Maria became the bridge between them. She knew both of them in different but profound ways. She understood Michael's pain, the fear of getting attached to something that might disappear again. And she understood Leonard's anxiety, the desperate desire to make up for lost time, but the terror of pushing too hard and driving away. The brother he had just found. She cooked simple meals that they ate together in the kitchen, not in the formal dining room. Conversations happened naturally while they washed dishes or made coffee. Small moments that gradually built trust, brick by brick. A therapist was hired. Dr. Helen, a middle-aged woman with a soft voice and kind eyes. She came 3 times a week and talked with Michael in sessions that sometimes lasted for hours. Leonard never asked what they talked about. He just waited, discreetly observing every small change in his brother. And the changes came. Slowly. But they came. Michael began to sleep better. He began to smile more. He began to play the piano on his own, not just when Leonard was present. The memories returned in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places. One afternoon, Robert appeared again. He brought important news. Leonard, Maria, and Michael gathered in the living room to listen. "I've tracked down the woman," Robert said, opening his folder. "The name Monica Fisher-Smith was false, as we suspected. But the signature led me to other documents. She used variations of the same name in different situations. I cross-referenced the data with the 15 disappearance cases I found. In at least 8 of them, the same signature appears." "Who is she?" Leonard asked. Robert hesitated. "This is where it gets complicated. I managed to identify the handwriting. It belongs to a woman named Helen Costa Ainsworth, and she has a connection to your family." Leonard turned pale. "Ainsworth? Is she a relative of ours?" "A distant cousin of your father. From what I've discovered, there was an inheritance dispute decades ago. When your grandfather passed away, he left the bulk of the fortune to his eldest son, your father, Helen. And her side of the family were left with very little. There are records of lawsuits, attempts to contest the will, all unsuccessful." Michael was listening intently, his fists clenched. "So it was revenge. She kidnapped me because of money." Robert shook his head. "It wasn't just about money. I found records of old correspondence, diaries. Helen had an unhealthy obsession with your family. She believed your father had stolen what was rightfully hers. When Michael was born, the obsession worsened. She saw your family's happiness as a personal insult. She decided to take away what you loved most. Not to gain anything, but just so you would suffer as she believed she was suffering." Leonard stood up and began pacing the room. "But why didn't she ask for a ransom? Why did she just take him and put him in the system?" "Because the goal was to make him disappear permanently," Robert explained. "If there was a ransom, there would be negotiation, a chance of return. She wanted Michael to vanish without a trace. She wanted your family to live in eternal uncertainty, with no answers, no closure. It was calculated cruelty." Maria felt nauseous. "And the other children? The other 15 cases?" Robert sighed. Some were part of the same scheme. Helen didn't act alone. She had contacts, people she paid to carry out the abductions and placements in orphanages. Other children were from families that, for one reason or another, she considered her enemies, or they were simply opportunities. Children she saw unattended in parks, in shopping centers. She was meticulous, patient. She waited for the right moment. Michael was silent for long minutes. Then he asked, his voice low but firm, "Where is she now?" Robert exchanged a look with Leonard. "She passed away 3 years. Health complications. She died alone in a modest flat in West London. She had no close family, few friends. According to reports, she spent the last years of her life bitter and isolated." The news fell upon them like lead. There would be no confrontation, no justice in the traditional sense. The person responsible for so much suffering was no longer there to answer for her actions. Leonard sat down again, putting his head in his hands. "So that's it. We can never do anything." Michael stood up and went to the window. He looked out at the garden, at the trees swaying in the wind. When he spoke, his voice was strangely calm. "Maybe it's better this way. If she were alive, we would spend years in lawsuits, in courtrooms, reliving everything over and over. She's gone. She can't hurt us anymore. And we are here together. That's what matters." Leonard looked at his brother with something close to admiration. "You're stronger than I am." Michael turned and smiled faintly. "I'm not strong. I'm just tired of carrying anger. I'd rather use that energy to build something new." And that's what they did. In the following weeks, with the help of lawyers and Dr. Helen, they began to plan. Leonard decided to create a foundation dedicated to investigating old child disappearances and supporting survivors of abduction and illegal adoptions. It would be a place where families could seek help, where investigations could be properly conducted, where children lost in the system could have a chance to rediscover their identities. Maria was invited to coordinate the foundation. At first, she hesitated, feeling inadequate. But Leonard insisted. "You understand better than anyone what these children go through. You lived it. And you're the one who brought us back together. Without you, I'd still be alone in this house without hope." Michael agreed. "You've always been brave, Maria, even when we were children. You defended me when no one else would. I need someone like that by my side on this project." And so she accepted, but on one condition. "I want to investigate my own story too. I want to know if I was truly abandoned or if I was also taken. I need to know the truth." Robert took on the investigation, and what he discovered was simultaneously painful and comforting. Maria had not been abandoned. She had been taken at the age of 2 from a supermarket in South London while her mother was paying for groceries. Her mother, Vera Smith, had searched desperately for years, but just as in Michael's case, the documents had been falsified. The name given to Maria at the orphanage was different from her birth name. Mary, not Maria. Smith, not Santos. Small differences, but enough to thwart the searches. When Robert brought this information, Maria was silent for a long time. Then she asked, her voice trembling, "Is she still alive? My mother?" "She is. She lives in Reading. Never remarried. Never. Had other children. She works as a teacher in a state school, and she never stopped looking for you." Maria's reunion with her mother took place on a Saturday afternoon. Leonard and Michael insisted on accompanying her for support. They drove to Reading, to a simple house in a residential neighborhood. Maria was trembling when she rang the doorbell. The door opened. A woman of about 55 appeared. She had grey hair, tired but kind brown eyes, and when she saw Maria, something in her face changed. It was as if time had stopped, as if 30 years had vanished, in an instant. "Mary," she whispered, her voice breaking. Maria nodded, unable to speak. And then she was in her mother's arms, crying as she hadn't cried since she was a child. Vera held her daughter as if she feared she might disappear again, whispering apologies, declarations of love, promises to never let her go again. Leonard and Michael waited in the car, giving them privacy. But through the window, They could see the embrace that lasted for an eternity, and they both understood. They understood that this search was not just about them, it was about all the lost children, all the broken families, all the years of unnecessary pain. When Maria returned to the car 2 hours later, her face was swollen from crying, but there was a light in her eyes that had never been there before. "She has an album," she said, still emotional. "An album with my baby photos, missing posters, newspaper clippings. She kept everything. She never gave up." "Just like our mother," Leonard said gently. "Just like me. Because that's what love does. It persists, even when all seems lost." The Reunion Foundation was officially inaugurated 6 months later. Its headquarters were in a restored building in Shoreditch, with offices, counseling rooms, and a comprehensive archive of old cases. Michael designed the logo, 2 boys holding hands in front of a piano, but now with additional details. There was a window behind them, and through the window a smiling child. It represented hope, reunion, healing. Dozens of people attended the inauguration, families still searching for missing children, adults who had grown up without knowing their true identities, professionals from social services, psychologists, lawyers, and journalists wanting to tell the story. Leonard gave a brief but emotional speech. He spoke about Michael, about the 30 years of separation, about the promise that had finally been fulfilled. He spoke about Maria, about how she had been the bridge connecting the past and present, and he spoke about collective responsibility, about how they could never again allow children to simply disappear into the cracks of the system. Michael didn't want to speak publicly, still feeling uncomfortable with the attention, but he created a series of drawings that were displayed on the foundation's walls. They were different from the ones he used to make. They didn't just show 2 boys and a piano. They showed families reunited, children smiling, doors opening, paths being illuminated. They were drawings of hope. Maria spoke on behalf of all the survivors. Her voice trembled at first, but it gained strength as she continued. She told her story. She told of growing up thinking she wasn't loved, of discovering she had been searched for all along, about the hole that the absence of identity creates in a person, and about the healing that comes with answers, even when those answers are painful. "I grew up without roots," she said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "Without knowing where I came from, who I was before the orphanage, and that leaves deep scars. It makes you feel invisible, disposable. This foundation exists to ensure that no child ever feels that way again, to ensure that every lost person is searched for, that every broken family has the resources to seek answers, and that every possible reunion happens." The audience applauded. There were tears on many faces, and after the official ceremony, people approached. They told their own stories. They asked for help. They offered support. The foundation was not just a building or an organization. It was a movement, a collective promise, that they would never again allow children to disappear without a fight. In the following months, the Reunion Foundation achieved impressive results. 7 cases of children who had disappeared decades ago were solved. 5 families were reunited. Documents were corrected. Identities were restored. Each victory was celebrated, not with excessive festivity, but with a quiet recognition of what it meant. Each person found was a promise fulfilled. Michael began teaching art to children and teenagers in shelters. He said that drawing had helped him keep his identity alive when everything around him tried to erase it. He wanted to teach other children to use art in the same way, as an anchor, as resistance, as hope. Leonard returned to work, but with a renewed purpose. He dedicated half his time to the family business and half to the foundation. And in the evenings, he no longer played that melancholic melody alone. He played with Michael. The 2 of them at the piano, 4 hands creating harmonies that filled the mansion with something that hadn't existed there for decades. Joy. Maria moved back to her mother's house in Reading, but spent her days at the foundation. She was rebuilding her relationship with Vera, learning about the family she never knew, filling the holes in her history, and for the first time in her life, she felt whole. She knew where she came from. She knew who she was. One evening, almost a year after the reunion, the three of them were sitting in the living room of the mansion. Leonard and Michael had just finished playing a complex sonata they had been practicing for weeks. Maria applauded, smiling. "You two are incredible," she said. "You sound like professionals." Michael laughed. "Far from it, but we're getting better." Leonard poured wine for the three of them. He raised his glass. "A toast to lost things that have been found, to promises fulfilled, and to the new stories we are writing." They toasted, and for a moment they were silent, each lost in thought. Maria thought of her mother, of how they were making up for lost time. Michael thought of how his memory was finally complete, how he knew who he was and where he came from. Leonard thought of the promise he had made at 10 years old and how, finally, he had been able to keep it. "You know what's strange?" Michael said suddenly. "All those years I kept drawing the two of you. I drew the piano, the house, the garden, but I also drew Maria. Not consciously, but she was there. In some drawings there were 3 people, 2 boys and a girl, as if somehow I knew we were all connected, that we all needed each other." Maria felt tears in her eyes. "We were always a family, weren't we? Even when we didn't know it. Even when we were apart. There was something connecting us." Leonard agreed. "And now we're together. Not just the 3 of us, but all the people we're helping through the foundation. We're creating a network of support, of hope, turning pain into purpose." They talked late into the night, about the past, about the present, about plans for the future. The foundation was growing. There were plans to open branches in other cities. Maria was writing a book about her experience, hoping it could help other survivors. Michael was organizing an exhibition of his drawings, with the proceeds going to the foundation. When Maria finally stood up to leave, Leonard hugged her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for recognizing that portrait, for having the courage to speak up, for staying by our side throughout this entire journey." She smiled. "No need to thank me. This is my journey too. Michael wasn't just your brother. He was my friend. And finding him meant finding myself too." Michael hugged her too. "You've always been brave, Maria. Even when we were children, and you thought you weren't. You've always been the bravest person I've known." She left into the cool London night, driving through the lit streets back to Reading. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel lost. She had a place, she had a family, she had a purpose. The scars of the past were still there, probably always would be. But now they were part of her story, not her whole story. They were reminders of where she came from, not determinants of where she was going. In the mansion, Leonard and Michael went up the stairs together. They reached the hallway where their rooms were, side by side as they had been in childhood. "Good night," Leonard said. Michael smiled. "Good night, brother. See you tomorrow." And those simple words carried so much weight. See you tomorrow. There was no more uncertainty, no more separation, no more of that constant fear that everything could disappear. They had found each other, and now they could build the future that was stolen from them. Leonard entered his room and looked out the window. He saw the city lights stretching to the horizon, and he thought of all the people out there, all the untold stories, all the families still separated, all the children still lost. And he made a new promise. This time, not just to himself, but to all of them. He would never give up. He would keep searching. He would keep helping, until every lost child was found, until every broken family had a chance to heal. It was a promise too big for one person. But he wasn't alone. He had Michael. He had Maria. He had the entire team at the foundation. He had all the volunteers, all the dedicated professionals, all the families who turned their pain into action. Together, they could make a difference, one life at a time, one reunion at a time. And in his room, Michael opened his sketchbook. Not the old one, which was now carefully preserved in the Foundation's archives, but a new one, blank, full of possibilities. He picked up a pencil and began to draw. Not 2 boys alone, but a crowd, people of all ages holding hands, forming a chain that stretched beyond the edges of the paper. It was his vision for the future, no one alone, everyone connected, everyone important, everyone sought, everyone loved. He drew until his hands were tired. Then he closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay down. And for the first time in 30 years he slept deeply, without nightmares, without anguish, just peace. Peace of knowing who he was, of knowing he had a home, of knowing that finally he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And in the darkness of the night, the mansion that had for so long been haunted by absence and silence finally breathed. The walls that held pain began to hold joy. The empty rooms began to fill with life. The piano that cried alone now sang in harmony. And that promise made by a 10-year-old boy to never give up, to always search, to bring his brother back, was finally fulfilled. Not in the way, not in the he had imagined, but in a better way. Because it didn't just bring one brother back, it brought hope back, for himself, for Maria, and for all those who were still searching. Time can erase faces, it can distort memories, it can create distances that seem impossible to cross, but it can never erase love. Love persists, in scribbles on walls, in forgotten drawings, in promises made by children who didn't know they were being heard. And when it is finally rediscovered, that love is not just about recovering what was lost. It's about building something new, something stronger, something that no separation, no malice, no circumstance can destroy. And while London slept, while millions of stories unfolded in millions of homes, 3 people finally found peace. Not the end of their journeys, but the beginning of new ones. Journeys where they would not be alone, where they would have each other, and where they would dedicate their lives to ensuring that no one else had to go through what they went through, that no more children would be forgotten, that no more families would be destroyed without a fight, that every lost person would be searched for with the same dedication, with the same love, with the same unwavering faith that someday, somehow, there would be a reunion. Because that's what families do. They don't give up. They don't forget. They don't stop searching. And when they finally find each other, they transform pain into strength, separation into connection, and darkness into light. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Leonard, Michael, and Maria has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of reunion, of fulfilled promises, and of love that transcends time, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Was it Leonard's determination to never give up, Maria's courage to seek her own truth, or Michael's resilience in keeping his identity alive through his drawings? Every day, we bring intense and emotional stories like this one, narratives that reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, that remind us of the strength of family bonds and the transformative power of love. Your presence here is very important to us. Until the next episode where a new story awaits you,